May 1st, 1960. The Cold War had divided the world into two hostile camps. In Washington, military leaders feared that the Soviet Union might be secretly building a massive nuclear arsenal capable of destroying the United States. In Moscow, Soviet leaders believed American bombers and missiles were preparing for a future attack. Both nations watched each other with suspicion, and every new piece of information could change the balance of power. In that atmosphere of fear and secrecy, intelligence became as important as armies. Long before sunrise, a solitary aircraft sat on a remote airfield in Pakistan. It looked fragile compared to a military fighter jet, with extremely long wings and a narrow fuselage designed for one purpose: reaching altitudes no ordinary aircraft could survive. The airplane was the Lockheed U-2, one of the most secret projects ever built by the United States. Only a small number of people knew its true mission, and even many American officials had never seen one. The pilot assigned to that mission was Francis Gary Powers, a former Air Force pilot recruited by the CIA. He had trained for years to fly at the edge of the atmosphere, where the sky turned dark and the earth curved beneath the aircraft. Before entering the cockpit, he put on a pressure suit that resembled the clothing of an astronaut. Technicians checked every hose, valve, and oxygen connection. At those altitudes, a small failure could be fatal. As the engines came to life, Powers taxied toward the runway in silence. He knew that once he took off, he would be alone for hours, crossing thousands of kilometers of hostile territory. The plan was to fly over some of the most sensitive military locations in the Soviet Union, photograph missile bases, bomber airfields, radar installations, and nuclear facilities, and then continue north toward Norway. If everything went according to plan, the world would never know the flight had happened. The U-2 climbed higher and higher until the clouds disappeared beneath it. From that altitude, the Soviet Union looked peaceful, almost motionless. Rivers, forests, and cities stretched across the landscape like a giant map. Powers concentrated on his instruments while automatic cameras inside the aircraft captured detailed photographs through the belly of the plane. Each image might reveal information that generals and presidents desperately wanted. What Powers did not know was that Soviet radar operators had already detected an unidentified aircraft moving across their airspace. Alarm messages spread through military command centers. Fighter pilots scrambled from nearby bases and attempted to intercept the intruder, but their aircraft could not climb high enough. The U-2 remained above them, unreachable, drifting across the Soviet sky like a ghost. Inside Soviet headquarters, frustration turned into anger. Nikita Khrushchev had repeatedly promised that Soviet defenses could protect the nation from foreign spies. Allowing an American aircraft to fly deep into Soviet territory would be an embarrassment as well as a security failure. Commanders ordered a more drastic response: surface-to-air missiles. Without warning, a missile streaked upward through the thin atmosphere. Powers saw a flash and then felt a violent shock. The aircraft suddenly lost control. The wings twisted, the fuselage broke apart, and debris exploded around him. For a moment, he believed he would die. Struggling against centrifugal forces and tangled equipment, he managed to escape the wreckage and deploy his parachute. As he descended toward the ground, Powers could see smoke rising from the scattered remains of the U-2. Soviet soldiers rushed toward the landing site. He was captured almost immediately. During the search, they recovered maps, cameras, film, survival equipment, and other items that proved the aircraft was conducting espionage. The mission that was supposed to remain invisible had become undeniable. News of the incident did not reach the American public immediately. In Washington, officials assumed that the pilot had been killed and that the aircraft had been destroyed beyond recognition. Believing they could avoid a diplomatic crisis, they announced that a weather research aircraft had disappeared after experiencing oxygen problems. The explanation was carefully written to sound routine and harmless. For several days, the American government believed the cover story had worked. Reporters asked questions, but officials repeated the same statement. Then Nikita Khrushchev delivered a speech that changed everything. He calmly announced that the Soviet Union had not only shot down the aircraft, it had also captured the pilot alive. He waited before revealing that detail, allowing the United States to repeat its false story first. When the truth emerged, the embarrassment in Washington was enormous. Photographs of the wreckage were shown to the world. Soviet authorities displayed cameras, film canisters, and espionage equipment recovered from the crash. The evidence was impossible to deny. Newspapers across Europe, America, and Asia printed dramatic headlines about American spying and Soviet retaliation. What had begun as a secret intelligence mission had become an international scandal. The timing could hardly have been worse. A major summit meeting between the leaders of the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, and France was about to take place in Paris. Many hoped the conference would reduce Cold War tensions and open a path toward arms control. Instead, the atmosphere became poisonous. Khrushchev demanded a formal apology from President Dwight Eisenhower and an end to future spy flights. Eisenhower faced a painful choice. Admitting responsibility would damage American credibility and reveal the extent of U.S. espionage operations. Refusing to apologize risked further confrontation with the Soviet Union. He chose not to issue the apology Khrushchev wanted. The summit collapsed, and the possibility of improved relations vanished almost overnight. Around the world, ordinary people watched the crisis with fear. Families remembered the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and understood that a future war might involve weapons far more powerful. Commentators asked whether one mistaken decision, one missile launch, or one military response could trigger a chain reaction leading to nuclear conflict. For a brief moment, the world seemed frighteningly close to catastrophe. Meanwhile, Francis Gary Powers disappeared into the Soviet prison system. He was interrogated for months about the U-2 program, the CIA, and American intelligence methods. Soviet officials wanted to know how often such flights occurred and what information the United States hoped to obtain. Powers cooperated within limits, trying to survive captivity while aware that millions of people now knew his name. In August 1960, Powers appeared before a Soviet court accused of espionage. The trial was carefully staged and widely publicized. Journalists filled the courtroom while prosecutors described American spy operations in dramatic detail. Powers was convicted and sentenced to imprisonment. To Soviet audiences, the trial demonstrated the strength of Soviet defenses. To American audiences, it was a humiliating reminder that the secret mission had failed. The story did not end there. Behind the scenes, diplomats and intelligence officers began discussing a prisoner exchange. The Cold War often operated through hidden negotiations, even during periods of public hostility. In February 1962, Powers was exchanged for Soviet spy Rudolf Abel on the Glienicke Bridge in Berlin, a location that later became famous as the Bridge of Spies. The exchange was conducted with precision and secrecy, symbolizing the strange rules of espionage between rival superpowers. The U-2 incident transformed intelligence operations. American leaders recognized that manned spy flights over the Soviet Union had become far more dangerous than they had believed. Greater attention was given to reconnaissance satellites, which could gather information without risking a pilot's capture. In a sense, the shoot-down accelerated the space-based surveillance programs that would dominate the later Cold War. For the Soviet Union, the incident was both a victory and a warning. Shooting down the U-2 proved that Soviet missile defenses were improving, but it also revealed how determined the United States was to gather intelligence. Neither side stopped spying, they simply developed more sophisticated methods. Historians still debate how close the crisis came to producing a military confrontation. The United States did not prepare an immediate attack, and the Soviet Union did not mobilize for war, yet the political damage was real. Trust between the two governments deteriorated sharply, and opportunities for cooperation were lost. In international politics, perception can be as dangerous as military force, and both nations left the crisis believing the other side was deceitful and aggressive. When people think about the Cold War, they often imagine missiles, tanks, and massive armies. Yet one of the most dangerous moments began with a single aircraft carrying one pilot and a set of cameras. The Lockheed U-2 was not a bomber, and Francis Gary Powers was not trying to start a war. He was flying a secret mission in a world obsessed with secrecy. The lesson of the U-2 incident is unsettling. Great powers may possess enormous armies and nuclear weapons, but history can still turn on small events. A radar signal, a missile launch, a captured pilot, a false statement, or a wounded national pride. In 1960, those small events combined to push the United States and the Soviet Union toward one of the tensest confrontations of the Cold War. The world eventually stepped back from the edge, but the memory remained. Every later crisis, from Berlin to Cuba, was shaped by the understanding that misunderstanding and secrecy could be deadly. The wreckage of the U-2 scattered across a Soviet field became more than the remains of an airplane. It became a warning about how fragile peace can be when nations fear each other, hide the truth, and compete for survival under the shadow of nuclear weapons. If you enjoy real stories about wars, espionage, and remarkable events from the past, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment on which story you would like to see in the next video. Your support means a lot and helps this channel continue bringing more in-depth historical content.